Man insults Michael Jordan on a first-class flight and instantly regrets it when the truth is revealed. The air was thick with a sense of urgency as passengers rushed through the gates of Los Angeles International Airport. Flight 3, E-17, to Tokyo, Narita, was scheduled to depart in an hour, and first-class passengers were beginning to gather. Among them was James Carter, a man who wore his ego like a tailored suit. James was used to standing out. His company, a flashy software startup, had recently reached its first billion-dollar valuation. His social media feed was a parade of self-congratulatory posts. "Disruption is my middle name," read his latest caption below a photo of him holding a glass of champagne. "Mr. Carter, welcome aboard." The flight attendant greeted him warmly, though the forced smile suggested she knew his type. James gave a curt nod and stepped into the luxurious first-class cabin, where each seat resembled a private pod, complete with reclining features and a personal screen. Seat 2A, his home for the next 12 hours. With a flourish, he removed his blazer, letting it drop onto his seat, and grabbed his noise-canceling headphones. A glance at the seat next to him showed it was still vacant. "Great. Maybe I'll finally get some peace." Moments later, a figure slid into seat 2B. The man's outfit, a simple hoodie and well-worn sneakers, contrasted sharply with James's tailored ensemble. His face was shadowed by a baseball cap, and he moved with the calm ease of someone accustomed to blending in. James barely looked up, focused on typing on his laptop as the man settled beside him. Later that evening, the man offered a polite nod. "Yeah, sure," James muttered without looking, too absorbed in yet another tweet to his 500,000 followers. As the cabin door closed and the engines roared to life, James felt a twinge of curiosity. Something about the man seemed oddly familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. Probably just another tech guy trying to live the dream, he thought dismissively, reclining into his seat. The flight attendant came by offering champagne. The man declined, opting for a bottle of water. James smirked to himself. "Water? Might as well be in economy class," he murmured just loud enough for the man to hear. The man said nothing, only offering a slight smile. Once the plane reached cruising altitude, James's natural need to dominate any environment kicked in. He downed the champagne in one gulp, placed the glass on the tray with a clink, and turned to the man beside him. "So, what do you do?" he asked, his tone dripping with the kind of interest that wasn't genuine. The man turned slightly, his face still partially hidden beneath the cap. "I work in tech," he replied simply. James grinned. "Oh, same here. I bet we have some war stories to share." He leaned back, ready to steer the conversation toward his favorite subject, himself, but the man showed no interest, merely nodding slightly and returning to scrolling on his phone. James wasn't used to being ignored. His curiosity turned into irritation. "You know," he began, his voice slightly louder to draw the attention of nearby passengers, "the tech world is full of people who get way too much credit for half-baked ideas. Take Michael Jordan, for example." The man in seat 2B paused, his finger hovering over his phone screen, but he didn't look up. Encouraged by the lack of response, James continued. "Everyone keeps calling Jordan a genius, but they forget how overrated he is." The man remained silent. "Basketball? Sure, impressive, if you enjoy watching someone throw a ball into a hoop. But as a businessman, overrated. And don't even get me started on the Jordan brand. It's all just name recognition and marketing." A faint laugh escaped from the man in 2B. It was almost imperceptible, but it sparked a fire in James. He leaned forward, ready to hammer home his point of view. "You think I'm wrong?" he challenged. "No," said the man, his voice calm, almost amused. "I think you're passionate." James furrowed his brow. He wasn't sure whether it was a compliment or an insult. "Passionate? I call it realism. People like Jordan are just riding the hype wave, nothing more." A few passengers glanced up, subtly interested in the conversation. James thrived on the attention, mistaking it for admiration. The man in 2B, however, seemed completely unconcerned. "Well," the man said, finally raising his face a little, though the cap still covered part of his expression, "everyone's entitled to their opinion." James rolled his eyes. "Yes, but facts are facts. Jordan is a walking PR stunt. People like me, Real innovators are the ones building the future, not just selling a name. The man offered a polite smile and returned to his phone. James leaned back, satisfied. Another wannabe who thinks he knows something. What he didn't know was that his seatmate's calm demeanor wasn't ignorance, but restraint. The hum of the engines filled the cabin as first-class passengers settled in for their readings, movies, or cocktails. But James would soon discover that the man next to him was not just another ordinary passenger. Oliver was far from relaxed. His irritation grew as the man in seat 2B remained silent, offering only the occasional smile or short response to his increasingly sharp remarks. "Let me guess," Oliver said, unable to hold back. "You're one of those startup guys. Something in crypto or AI, right? Everyone's jumping on those bandwagons these days." The man briefly lifted his eyes, his expression unreadable. Not exactly. The ambiguity only fueled Oliver's irritation. He thrived on being the center of attention, and the lack of engagement from the passenger beside him was an affront to his ego. "What's your opinion on Michael Jordan, then?" Oliver asked, his voice sharper now. "I mean, if you're in the business world, you must have an opinion." The man hesitated for a moment, then shrugged. "He's done some interesting things." "Interesting things?" Oliver repeated, laughing. "That's the understatement of the century. The guy's a walking contradiction, preaching excellence and overcoming obstacles while his company invests millions in personal marketing, talking about legacy while barely mentioning the people who helped him get there." For the first time, a flicker of something crossed the man's face. Amusement, perhaps, or slight irritation. But it disappeared as quickly as it appeared. "And maybe he's just doing what he thinks is best," the man replied simply, his tone neutral. "What he thinks is best," Oliver scoffed, spoken like someone who's never really dealt with the consequences of the real world. "It's all theory until you're the one left holding the bill." The flight attendant arrived with the dinner orders, interrupting the tension. The man in seat 2B ordered a simple vegetarian meal, while Oliver chose a rare steak. When the plates were placed in front of them, Oliver noticed how the man ate calmly, as if he had all the time in the world. "Must be nice," Oliver murmured quietly, "not having a care in the world." The man glanced at him but said nothing, focusing on his meal. As the hours passed, Oliver's curiosity about his seatmate grew. There was a quiet confidence in him, a discreet presence that Oliver couldn't decipher. The man didn't seem intimidated by Oliver's loud criticisms, nor did he let himself be drawn into his obvious attempts to provoke him into an argument. And then there were the whispers. The passing flight attendants seemed to look at the passenger in 2B with a mix of curiosity and respect. One of them even addressed him softly. "Let me know if you need anything, sir." Oliver noticed this and frowned. "Who is this guy?" He leaned forward, pretending to adjust his seat. The man's face was still partially obscured by his baseball cap, but something about his jawline, the way he carried himself, bothered Oliver. As the cabin lights dimmed and the passengers around them settled in for the long flight, Oliver decided to let it go. Just a rich, eccentric guy. He put on his headphones and reclined his seat, unaware of the subtle look his travel companion gave him. A look that suggested something far beyond what Oliver could imagine. The hours passed and the cabin remained silent, except for the occasional clink of glasses and the rustling of blankets. After a few drinks, Oliver was feeling more relaxed and encouraged. He leaned back, scanning the cabin for new distractions. His gaze landed again on the man in seat 2B. "All right," Oliver said, breaking the silence between them. "I give up. You have to tell me what your business is." The man raised his eyes but said nothing. "You've been sitting there, all calm and mysterious. Let me guess, venture capitalist? Or an eccentric heir of a trust fund?" The man chuckled quietly, not taking his eyes off the book he had just opened. "No." "Come on," Oliver insisted, his voice carrying a challenging tone. "You can't just sit here like an enigma and not reveal anything." The man finally looked at him, meeting his gaze directly for the first time. His eyes were sharp, observant, and suddenly very familiar. But before Oliver could put the pieces together, a flight attendant approached the row with an air of formality. "Excuse me, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice respectful but professional. "The captain asked me to inform you that your connection in Tokyo is confirmed, and they will be ready to receive you as soon as we land." Oliver froze. The words didn't register immediately, as if his brain needed a moment to process. "Mr. Carter?" The man in seat 2B gave the flight attendant a polite nod. "Thank you," he said. His tone was warm but discreet. The pieces fell into place with a shocking clarity. The hoodie, the unassuming demeanor, the quiet confidence. It wasn't just anyone sitting next to him. It was Michael Jordan. James Carter's mouth went dry, his heart pounding in his chest as he replayed the past few hours in his mind. Every insult, every criticism, every mocking jab, it had all been directed at the man himself. He had thought he was untouchable, that Michael Jordan was just a public figure miles away from his life. For the first time on the flight, James was completely speechless. Michael Jordan slightly adjusted his cap and returned to his book, as if nothing had happened. But James's discomfort was palpable. His bravado, so strong earlier, was now crumbling under the weight of pure humiliation. The passengers around them, who had been pretending not to listen, now exchanged subtle glances. Their expressions were a mixture of amusement and second-hand embarrassment. James cleared his throat, desperate to regain his composure. "You're Michael Jordan?" Michael closed the book and gently placed it on the tray. "That's what they say," he replied, his tone light but sharp with humor. James's face turned red. I didn't mean anything I said earlier. I was just, talking. You can't take these things personally." Michael tilted his head slightly, studying James with an unreadable expression. Then with a small smile, he said, "Don't worry, I don't." The tension in the cabin was thick, enough to be cut with a knife. James fumbled with his drink, taking a long gulp in a vain attempt to calm his nerves. Michael, on the other hand, seemed completely unbothered, exuding a calmness that only heightened James's discomfort. Then James began, trying to find a way out of the hole he had dug for himself. "You're probably used to people criticizing you, right? Comes with the territory." Michael leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "I suppose, but I've always believed that criticism is useful, as long as it's constructive." He looked at James with a glint of amusement in his eyes. "Was yours constructive?" James's face burned. "Well, I didn't know I was talking to you, obviously." Michael's smile widened a bit, but his tone remained composed. "Does it matter who you're talking to? If the points are valid, they remain regardless of the audience." The answer left James momentarily stunned. Despite all his bravado, he had no response. Michael, however, was not finished. "You mentioned basketball," Michael said, his voice calm but deliberate. "Do you know how many people found inspiration to escape poverty or overcome hardships because of the sport? How many careers and lives were shaped by the game?" James shifted in his seat, suddenly feeling very small. I guess I never looked at it that way." "And philanthropy?" Michael continued, his gaze unwavering. "You called it pure marketing, but did you know my donations helped fund entire schools and community programs? That with each initiative, we're trying to create opportunities for those who've never had them?" James opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. The weight of Michael's words hung in the air. "What about my post-NBA career?" Michael said, his tone softening slightly. "Yes, not everything was perfect, but sometimes risk is necessary for change. Ideas evolve through friction. Without it, there's no progress." The entire first-class cabin seemed to hold its breath. Michael's words were neither angry nor defensive. They were simply factual, spoken with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. James swallowed hard. "Look, I didn't think you'd be here." Michael leaned slightly forward, his expression gentle but firm. "The truth doesn't change based on who's listening. Maybe next time you should consider that before you speak." It wasn't said harshly, but it hit James harder than any insult could have. He leaned back in his seat, feeling small in the vastness of the first-class cabin. For the remainder of the flight, James remained strangely quiet. His mind churned, replaying every word he'd said, Every presumptuous comment, every insult pointed directly at the man sitting inches from him. He felt a mixture of embarrassment, regret, and a strange sense of respect. Meanwhile, Michael returned to his book as if the confrontation had been nothing more than a fleeting conversation. Occasionally, a flight attendant would approach him with silent professionalism, offering subtle gestures of deference, gestures that now made perfect sense to James. The moment of humility weighed on James like a stone in his chest. It wasn't just about being caught in a moment of arrogance. It was about realizing how little he truly understood about the people and ideas he had so casually dismissed. As the cabin lights dimmed and most of the passengers drifted to sleep, James leaned hesitantly forward. "Hey, Mr. Jordan," he whispered, his voice low enough not to disturb the silent cabin. Michael lifted his eyes, his expression neutral but attentive. "Summon, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," James said, his words heavy with sincerity. "I was out of line. It's easy to criticize from the outside, but I can't imagine the weight of doing what you do." Michael studied him for a moment, then he nodded slightly. "Apology accepted," he simply said. "It's not easy, but that's the nature of progress. You'll always face resistance, especially from people who don't see the bigger picture. The key is to keep moving forward." James nodded, his throat tight. For the first time, he had nothing clever to say. As the plane began to descend into Tokyo, the cabin came alive with the sound of passengers moving and preparing for arrival. James looked out the window, seeing the city lights grow brighter as the plane neared the runway. He thought about all the times he had dismissed people like Michael Jordan, visionaries who dared to think bigger, take more risks, and solve problems most wouldn't even try. In his quest to appear knowledgeable, he had ignored the courage it took to face constant criticism while pursuing something meaningful. When they disembarked, Michael turned to James one last time. "Good luck with your work," he said, offering a small smile. "I hope it's something that makes a difference." James watched as Michael disappeared into the crowd, flanked by discreet airport staff who were taking him to his next engagement. For the first time in years, James felt something unfamiliar. Humility. He wasn't sure what he would do with this new perspective. But he knew one thing. He could never go back to being the man he was when he boarded that plane. The lesson was clear. It's easy to criticize from the outside, but the real challenge is to take risks, understand, and create change.